Alright guys, so let's dive in a little bit deeper to a few techniques that could help you to achieve more accurate drawings. So the first thing we'll talk about is axis lines. Now these are imaginary lines that run through most every object. Today I'm going to be talking about more objects that are cylinder based. So we all know roughly that a cylinder looks something like this. So a can of soup, mugs, cups, bowls, all that kind of stuff are roughly built from a cylindrical type of a shape. I'm going to start my loose drawings, my more gestural drawings, with a colored pencil, and then I'll go back on top with just a darker graphite. So let's start with a real simple cylinder, and I'll have pictures of each of these up along with you guys. And I would encourage you guys to try this with, if you're drawing along at home, to try the same thing where you start with a colored pencil and then build the darker lines on top with either a darker colored pencil or with graphite. So if we look into a basic cylinder shape, really simple cylinder, first of all, I can approximate that it should fit into a box-like form for starters, especially a cylinder of this size. So I'm going to start by just drawing a cube, or I should say square, more or less. If it was a taller cylinder, it would be more of a rectangle. So by building the squarish form first, I've already started this idea of axis lines. So let me show you what I mean. I can, from these horizontal and vertical axes, I can build the structure of the cylinder around that. Now, one thing I should note already off the bat, I'm noticing something that I do that might help you guys with your straight lines. One, I hold the pencil in that butter knife grip we talked about before. Two, I try to draw from my shoulder, and I'll have a supplemental video on this too, but I'm swinging my arm with my shoulder and not with my wrist. So the wrist, when you bend your wrist, you get what I like to call the windshield wiper effect. So notice my line naturally wants to curve, and I see people straight lines do that all the time. I also see people do this when they're trying to get, say, a straight horizontal line, choppy strokes, and then you end up with a zigzag, kind of a hairy line. So instead, what I would urge you to try is to hold back on your pencil and to really move your whole arm from the shoulder. Now what I do when I'm trying to get a nice horizontal or vertical line, I test it first. I like do the movement with my arm before I actually touch the page. And once I feel like I've got a nice fluid line, I go for it. And generally you get a better approximation of a nice straight line that way than you do by going chop, 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 the dashed mark effect. And again, there will be a supplemental video just on that for those of you who are interested. So right now I've got a grid of horizontals and verticals. Now to build my ellipses of this cylinder, I'm going to use my landmarks here. So I know how wide I should be over here. I have a nice vertical edge already for my cylinder. And then if I really want to know where the high point of this circle should be, or elliptical shape, I'm going to approximate a vertical axis right down the middle of this. So I've got horizontal axes here, I've got a vertical through the middle and the vertical at the edges, and now I know the top of this, the most high point, the rounded most point here, and the rounded most point at the bottom should fall right across this vertical axis. And that's basically halfway from the left side to the right side, right down the middle. Now in the same way, the bottom of my ellipse, the most rounded point, is going to be right down there at the base. If we were drawing this as if it was see-through, we'd be able to see the back side of that cylinder canister shape. And then for the lid, we're going to follow the same flow. And now it's starting to look like a can or a cylinder with a lid. And this is the point where once we get that far along, we can come in, because we've done the loose gestural work along with our axis lines, you could come in and really tighten this thing up. Darken the lines, clean it up a little bit. Now notice I'm still drawing pretty sketchy and light because we're still pretty early on in the drawing. I'm kind of rushing this just for your guys' sake, so that you're not sitting here forever. But you notice that I can use my original lines like a framework And then you can really get a little more specific here as we go. So on just a basic cylinder, these lines are helpful, but as your cylinders get more and more complex, they're essential. They're really helpful. So let me show you what I mean. I've got an image of wood glue that should be showing up on your screen soon. So this is a little bit tougher because we have, here, I'll hold this for you. I got the real deal here. We've got one cylinder here, two cylinders, and then a really complex cylinder up at the top. So we have to deal with all of that. So what am I gonna do to start? Same basic thing. This time, I'm gonna start with a nice tall, skinny rectangle, because this is gonna be the body of the wood glue, like that, the actual base part that holds all the glue. So this is my first cylinder, but notice I'm starting with just a rectangle. Perfectly horizontal lines here, perfectly vertical right here. Okay, now I know there's a smaller cylinder on top, and it comes in just a little bit, so somewhere right around here. So I'm gonna make a little mark for where I think that green disc is on the top. Now, before I get too much further, I wanna start to give a sense of where this becomes an actual cylinder form. So I'm gonna give it the illusion of a cylindrical top here, okay? Beautiful. Gonna sharpen my pencil real fast because I'm getting a little soft, a little bit rounded on the edge. Okay, so that is my top of my, the white portion of the bottle. Now that I have the left and right side of my green disc, I'm gonna make sure that those lines are pretty close to even. That looks pretty good. Now, one thing I wanna do soon too is estimate a middle line. So this is that middle axis. It's imaginary, but it runs right down the center of this object. Okay, now this thing's starting to come together a little bit. All right, for my green disc, it just sits a little bit above or right on top of the white disc. All right, it's kind of a skinny shape. So I'm making sure that looks nice and flat. All right, there's the top of my green disc. And notice I'm using this axis line to make sure it feels like this green piece is centered with the body of my cylinder. And so far it's looking pretty good. The roundedness at the base. And then there's also a tall, skinny cylinder up at the top. So this is the part where the glue actually comes out of. So, looks kind of flat on the top. It's about yay tall, so I'm just giving myself a little estimate of how tall I want that to be. Looking for where the base might sit, right around the middle of this disc. I'm gonna turn it into a rectangle for starters. That's a good way to begin. And then break it into something a little more complex. So, what happens is there's a small cylinder right at the base. It widens out. There's a second cylinder that flares out a little bit wider. And I'm gonna make that equal distance on each side. So notice that flares a bit here and a bit here, like a bell. Comes back in and gets just a little skinnier and then ends at the top. And this is where there's like a slit where the glue would come out right up here at the top. There's also a little bit of a shape like this, kind of an edge to that. So notice I was able to start with just another rectangle form to get the height and the width of it, and then I was able to build that detail around it. That's what we want to do. Start simple or general, and then build in the specific quality. So we've got axis lines first, general to specific. Again, we talked about that in the first video. So important. Okay, now we can come in and really clarify the lines. And I was starting to do that just with the colored pencil, but you can see that coming in with the darker graphite pencil will be pivotal to really make this thing pop off the page, stand out quite a bit more for you. And this is a dark pencil. It's probably the equivalent of a 2B or something like that. You don't have to draw quite that dark, but for me, it's just a nice, quick way to get some really bold lines. All right, and this is the way I like to draw, where you can see the loose under kind of design underneath. And it's great to do this with colored pencil, then a darker pencil on top, and it really makes it come to life. So one other thing that's kind of a cylindrical form that we could do the same idea with. Let's look at something even tougher, like a table lamp. So I've got the image of the table lamp up on the screen. This one's really kind of a wild shape, you know, a lot going on with it. So let's see. I'm going to start by, because it's such a particular shape, it's a big shape, and there's a lot going on, I'm going to start with measuring points. So I want the top of the lamp to sit here. I want the base of the lamp to come no lower than, let's say, right around here. So I'm just kind of setting measuring points for myself, top, bottom. Once I've got that, now I'm going to think about how big is the lamp shade versus how big is the base of the lamp. So let's say this is about halfway. I think that the base to the lamp is a little taller than the actual shade. So I'm going to say the shade is going to sit right around here, the bottom of that shade. Now, to make more sense of this, let's go ahead and give ourselves a nice vertical line. This is the axis. It's going to go straight up and down. It's going to run through the base and all the way up to the, what do you call it? Shade of the lamp. All right, lamp shade roughly is going to be kind of a trapezoid shape. I'm just approximating the angles, trying to make sure it feels roughly equal distance on all sides. Okay, looking pretty good so far. Then once we do that, we can make it a little more specific. So at the top, there's going to be a bit of an ellipse shape to make it look more 3D. Comes down and flares out at the bottom, comes down and flares, and right at the base, we need to make it look nice and rounded too, because we know that's an ellipse shape, something like that. So already we started really simple. We're starting to get a little more specific as we go. Now, the base of the lamp is composed of a few major parts. I see a wide disc right around here. I see some shoulders that flare out a little bit below that, somewhere around here. From those shoulders, it kind of gets skinnier and skinnier. And then it's going to flare back out again at the base, somewhere around here. So notice how I'm able to use, as long as I have a nice straight vertical line here, I'm using that as my center post, and I'm going to build some of this complication around it. So again, I've got a disc that comes out and kind of points to the left and the right, just below the shade. It cuts in a little bit, and I'm trying to work both sides kind of simultaneously so I get those feeling symmetrical. So let me write that down for you. Symmetry is super important in something like man-made objects, bottles, cylinders, jars, containers. They're always going to be symmetrical, and it's making them feel off-kilter and kind of off asymmetrical that often is the problem with the drawing. Okay, so now I've got the disc that comes out wide. It cuts in a little bit. It rounds back out into like these wider shoulders right through here. So again, just going off of that loose structure from the beginning. Okay, it cuts slowly downhill on both sides toward a skinniest point, which is going to be somewhere right through here. Maybe right in there. We'll want to make it the skinniest. Starts to flare back again. It's a nice little disc shape right around here. Keeps flaring outward until we get to the widest point of our disc, somewhere around here. And then curves back down. So once again, notice you take something very, very simple, the way I started it, and build it out more and more detailed. Now from here, this is a really little drawing of a big object, but from here we can get way more specific. We can start to break down the shade of the lamp into that steel armature underneath. You can see where there's the structure of, I can see 1, 2, from my view, I can see about 3 of those steel rods through them, where the shape of the fabric across is influenced by what's underneath it. I can see where there's a bit of fabric at the bottom here, a little bit of a seam right here. So more and more detail, right, as we go. Across this base of the lamp, for sure, there's way more detail where it looks like a woodworker has, put this on a lathe, basically, where we can see many, many small components, where it goes in and back out again, and it's much more detailed than I originally drew it. But as long as you have the framework roughly right underneath, you can start to build that detail on top, or you should be able to. So if the framework is good and solid, you'll have no problem achieving the detail you want. If the framework is garbage, or just a little rushed, there's no way to get that detail right. So notice how many of these horizontal axes I have, and that one really important big vertical axis that's going to make that feel symmetrical, upright. It doesn't feel like it's leaning one way or the other, and it starts to feel nice and accurate. So I would urge you guys to practice that same thing, starting with the loose colored pencil, the gesture, and the axes or axis lines underneath, and then building the tighter, kind of more specific lines on top with a darker pencil.